Hello YouTube, Helsinki Rocks AGF here. Today I'm going to be counting down my top 10 favorite Metallica albums. Now there are only 10 studio albums, so that's why the number is 10. I'm not counting Garage Inc. as it's a cover album, and I'm also not counting Lulu because it's a collaboration album. These are strictly original Metallica albums. So we're going to start things off right away with number 10, and I'm sure everyone knows it's Saint Anger. This is an album that I feel had to exist. If you've not seen the documentary Some Kind of Monster, which chronicles the making of this to a lesser extent, it's more so about the band themselves and the state they were in personally at the time. This album had to exist or there would be no Metallica afterwards. And I'm sure to some people they would have been okay if there was no more Metallica. I don't think it's necessarily a terrible album. If it were maybe released by another band and it wasn't Metallica, I think it would be maybe a little bit more well regarded. My standout tracks are Frantic and Sweet Amber. There is actually a cool redone version of Some Kind of Monster, the song, that was on an EP somewhere, and it's actually a really cool thing. The songs, they've cut out some of the filler parts. The snare drum is normal, it's a little bit better produced. It's from the Some Kind of Monster film soundtrack, I think. If the whole album would have been produced the way that particular version of that song was, then I think it would have been a much better album, all in all. My least favorite track on here is gotta be Invisible Kid. I feel like Invisible Kid is probably my least favorite song by Metallica, for sure, maybe even of all time. It's a really bad song. If you're interested in that alternate version of Some Kind of Monster, I'll post a link to it in the description. Number 9, again, it's probably not a surprise to anyone here. We have Load. To me, this is an album that took me a while to get into. I love Reload, and you guys will see that where it's obviously not at the bottom. But I always felt like Load was just kind of a really weak album compared to Reload. And I've been listening to it a little bit more lately. I've put it in my car, and some of the songs I actually feel like are pretty much modern classics. Like, they're the classics of the 90s Metallica catalog. Songs like Bleeding Me and The Outlaw Torn is amazing, especially if you find the Unencumbered mix. For those that don't know, this album was actually too long for CD, so they had to chop the last minute off of The Outlaw Torn. And the last minute version, the full version, was released on the Memory Remains single as the Outlaw Torn Unencumbered by Manufacturing Restrictions version. So I'll put a link to that also in the description. Those two are great songs, as well as Ain't My Bitch, 2x4, obviously the singles Until It Sleeps, King Nothing, Hero of the Day. There are some kind of bad songs on here, though. I've never been a fan of The House That Jack Built. I've heard it talked up a lot, but that song's never done it for me. Also, songs like Cure, Poor Twisted Me, and Ronnie, they're kind of unnecessary, I would say. A lot of people say that they wish Metallica would have done Load and Reload as one album, cutting out the filler and making one really solid album. And I'm going to disagree with that, because if I tried to whittle these down, I don't think I could get it down to a 12 or 13 song album, because I like more than that number of songs combined. So if it would have been a double album, maybe with like 4 or so less songs, so we'd end up with like 22 or 23 versus, like 29 or whatever. But yes, Load, number 9. Number 8, this is going to be a shock for some people, I am sure. Kill 'Em All. Wow, right? The debut album. Now, let me go ahead and say, before everyone gets mad at me, I do not think Kill 'Em All is a bad album. I don't think Load is a bad album. Saint Anger, I would call it a bad album. This is ranked this low for me because I'm not as big of a fan of the songs compared to the other 80s albums. There are great songs here. Kill 'Em All, No Remorse, Seek and Destroy, Whiplash, Motor Breath, Jump in the Fire. they're all great songs, but then I think there's some real clunkers here that I'm not a fan of. I've never been a fan of the Four Horsemen. I like the song as it were before, the Mechanix. Debatably, the lyrics to the Mechanix were stupid, which they were, and kind of so are the ones to the Four Horsemen. But the Mechanix is so much more concise. It doesn't have that huge, drawn-out middle section that is so uninspired and so unnecessary, you know, that they don't even play it live. They haven't played that part live for years and years and years, just because it was kind of put in mostly just to spite Dave, and it kind of just feels shoehorned in. The Mechanix, on the other hand, is just such a raw, like, straight knockout blow. It doesn't ever let up. But it's a great album showcasing the band in their early years. It's raw, it's powerful. I just don't think the songwriting is quite up to par with what would come later, which is natural for a first album. So number 7, the Black Album. And I know some people are going to be a little bit confused by that as well. I don't have a problem with the Black Album. I don't think Metallica sold out or whatever you want to call it. I like this album. I think it's fine. It's just, to me, I kind of feel like it's a little bit lower for me just because it's been so overdone. And that's not to say it's bad or that I think, you know, it's popular so it's stupid. It's just, if I could never hear Enter Sandman again, or, you know, Sad But True, or Wherever I May Roam, those are good songs, but if I never heard them again, I don't think I'd ever miss them, just because, you know, I've probably heard Enter Sandman 45,000 times in my life. But there are good songs on here. I love The Unforgiven. I love Through the Never, Of Wolf and Man, My Friend of Misery, you know, The God That Failed. Those are all really good songs. I think they're really strong songs, and this is a really strong album. It's just, to me, I never go back and listen to this. When I do, I have a good time with it. I just frequently not inspired to come back to it as often. Which brings us to number 6, Death Magnetic. A lot of people are really hard on this album. I was hyped beyond hype when this album was on its way out. Like, the day that the release for The Day That Never Comes, I was like, this is cool. I really like this. Like, wow, like, this is going to be a great album. And it is. The mastering is really crappy, so is the production, which brings it down some. But some of these songs, like, I love That Was Just Your Life. The end of the line is a little bit more hit or miss, but there are still some really great riffs and some really great lines in there. I'd say Broken, Beaten, Scarred might be my least favorite song on here, just because it's repetitive, and there's nothing wrong with a repetitive song, but they only have like 4 lines, and it's like a 7-minute song. It's just the same lines repeated over and over again. Maybe if it would have been like 5 minutes or 4 minutes, that would have been a little better, but I think it kind of goes on too long. All Nightmare Long is a standout track. Cyanide, I'm okay on that one. The Unforgiven 3, my biggest problem with is the piano intro. I like piano. I love the Beatles. But when you're going to call a song The Unforgiven, and the only thing tying those songs together is that horn opening, because what is in common with 1 and 2? The horn intro, and that's really about it. So then they have this song that they're calling The Unforgiven 3, which kind of is a similar lyrical theme, but it doesn't, I feel like, connect to the other 2 as well, just because it doesn't have the horn, and that's my number 1 answer for that. Don't like the instrumental on this one, but a really solid album, a great return to form. I think it's got a really cool design to it. This is my launch day CD. So number 5, right in the dead middle here, we're going for Hardwired to Self-Destruct. This is the 3-disc edition. It's still really new, and I haven't spent as much time listening to it as I probably should have before going ahead and calling it number 5. But the tracks on here that I love, I really love. Hardwired is great. Atlas Rise might be my second favorite song off the album, only because Spit Out the Bone exists. Now That We're Dead, excuse me, Now That We're Dead sounds like Load and Reload, like cranked up to 11, and that's one thing I've really liked about this album. A lot of people say that it's, inspired by Kill 'Em All, and in some places I can see that, but it also is heavily inspired by Load and Reload to my ears, especially on Now That We're Dead. It just sounds like Load and Reload, and so does Dream No More and Halo on Fire. They kind of have that Load and Reload kind of sound to them, and I think this is a great album. It does have some clunkers. It's a little bit too long. We probably could have done without Confusion, without Man Unkind. I think I would trade off both of those songs to have Lords of Summer, which, it's on the bonus disc if you have the 3-disc copy, but it's a great album. I like it just a smidge more than Death Magnetic, mostly because of the production. Everything sounds a lot better. James' voice sounds better. I think the songwriting is a little bit better. This one has a few more misses than Death Magnetic. I think the highs are higher and maybe the lows are a little bit lower, but I think it balances out so that Hardwired gives it the edge, coming right in at number 5. Number 4, which is probably going to draw some confusion from some of you guys, Ride the Lightning. Now, pretty much once we're up here to 4, I would say that these albums from here on out are basically flawless. And Ride the Lightning, to me, is the most flawed one. James's voice still isn't quite to the level of power it has, in Master of Puppets and Justice. He still kind of got a little bit of that Kill 'Em All-like weirdness to it. The guitar sound here is purely Marshall still at this point, and I really feel like they hit the peak of the crushing sound with the mesas that would come in Puppets and Justice. But it's a fantastic album. The sound is great. It's not quite as good as What Would Come, but it was a great sampler of what was about to happen. Fight Fire with the classical opening and one of the fastest songs I think they've ever done. Ride the Lightning, the great title track. It's a really atmospheric song. For Whom the Bell Tolls, it's kind of overplayed and overdone these days, but it's a really cool song. That bass line is amazing. Fade to Black, the first Metallica power ballad. I don't come back to it very often, but I do think it's a good song. Trapped Under Ice is a thrash masterpiece in my opinion. I love that song. But then there's Escape, and Escape is a huge black mark on this album. The band hates it. I hate it. A lot of people on the internet claim they like it. I just never see it. It doesn't sound like Metallica, especially 80s Metallica. And I just don't think it gels with the album. I think it would have been significantly better if they just would have dumped that song. Of course, Cthulhu, you don't even have to say anything about the Call of Cthulhu. But this might be my favorite cover art out of all the albums. I have this on vinyl, the remastered vinyl, and it's just so fun to pick up and look at it. It's amazing. Number 4... Sorry, this is number 3. And Justice for All. Now, if I would have made this list for you guys 2 years ago, this probably would have been number 8 or number 9. I never used to be a fan of Justice, and it's grown on me so much. I did the same thing I did with Load. I just kind of put it in my car and my CD player, and I would just listen to it on my way to work or on my way from work. And the more I listened to it, I was like, damn, what was I thinking? I don't think the guitar sounds as good as Puppets. James' voice sounds amazing here. But I still kind of feel a little bit the same way, mostly because it just seems to be overdone a little bit. It feels like they tried a little bit too hard. The rhythms and the polyrhythms and the syncopations and all that, it's a little bit more technical than I like. That's why I love Puppets so much. It's not as technical. Obviously it's a technical, songs, it's Metallica. But it just didn't seem to have some of the weird, kind of spontaneous, random riff changes or random, 2-bar riff changes or tempo changes or random repetitions of other parts out of the blue. I noticed that in a lot of these songs, they end almost the same way. They'll do the chorus, and then they'll do the chorus again, all of a sudden, it's just a weird kind of thing I noticed. But it's not a bad album. I think the combination of the Marshall with the Mesa gave me a little bit more of an edge to the guitar sound on Puppets. This one kind of sounds flat and kind of lifeless, which is one of the big flaws of this album, is the production. Obviously, you can't hear the bass at all. The guitars kind of sound kind of lifeless. They tried to sound heavy and they tried to sound huge, but they take up a lot of space, but they don't really have a lot of weight behind them. Like, it sounds like they want to be big, but there's nothing there to fill the space with, I guess. I mean, it's kind of hard to explain. But on the Frayed Ends of Sanity, the riff that comes in at, I think, like 4 minutes and like 4 seconds, right about that place, the that might be my favorite riff in the entire Metallica discography. That riff is insane. It's bonkers. It's mind-blowing, that riff, to me. And this album has really grown on me. I've really come to appreciate it. It's very flawed production-wise, but it's hard to top. I'm trying to think of the word. What a good, like, exercise, what a masterclass this is of thrash songwriting and thrash songs workmanship, you know? Dyer's Eve is fucking amazing. Frayed Ends of Sanity, Harvester of Sorrow, you know? Such great songs. Which brings us to number 2. And I'm actually cheating a little bit. I would go ahead and say these two albums are tied as my personal favorite. And that's Master of Puppets and Reload. And I know you guys are going to be fucking going ballistic because I picked Reload as basically number 1. But the way I view Metallica, I don't compare these albums to these albums. Like, I don't try to compare Kill 'Em All to the Black Album or Ride the Lightning to Reload or whatever. I don't try to do that. I take the first 4 albums as thrash albums, and then like the Black Album and Load and Reload and even Saint Anger is they're just kind of hard rock albums. And so I kind of try to keep them separate in my mind a little bit. And so that would mean that my favorite of the first 4 albums is Master, and my favorite of the next 4 is Reload. So I'm going to talk about Master first. To me, this is a flawless album. I don't think Reload is flawless. I'm going to say that now. I don't think it's perfect, and I don't think it's flawless. I think Master of Puppets is a flawless album. From the design, to the first track, to the last track. It's an absolute masterpiece from beginning to end. Battery, Master of Puppets, The Thing That Should Not Be, Sanitarium, Disposable Heroes, Leper Messiah, Orion, and Damage Inc. 8 songs is all it took to make what might be my favorite album of all time. It's concise, it's not bloated, the songs are lean, they're fucking crazy, they're fast, but they're not overly complicated, they're not too complicated for their own good, the songwriting is there. It's just all in all what I think of as a perfect album. And it's easily probably my second favorite, tied for first favorite Metallica album. Also way up high on my list of all time. Probably number 1 or number 2. Which leads me to talk about Reload. I knew from the beginning when you guys saw that it wasn't like number 10 or number 9 that you were going to already think I was crazy. But I give Reload the edge to my favorite album by Metallica. Because I don't really think there's very many bad songs here. I think they came really, really close to having another flawless album. And there's only one song on here I would take off to make it a flawless album. And that's Where the Wild Things Are. And I know in some circles online, people who really like Load and Reload think that's one of the standout tracks. And don't get me wrong, I love Load and I love Reload. But that song kills this album for me. It doesn't seem to blend in. James's voice has got this weird kind of like almost weird like heavy metal Bob Dylan thing going on that it just doesn't work for me. And I know it's a Jason Newsted song. I believe Jason wrote Where the Wild Things Are, and I love Jason. I just don't think that's a very good song. But Fuel, The Memory Remains, Hate Them All You Want, they're the big singles from the album. They're the only two songs from Reload that are still played live. But they're so great. The Devil's Dance is one of the heaviest of every Metallica song. You listen to that song and it's just massive sounding. It sounds huge and it's so heavy and so powerful. I believe there's a video they played it in 2012 or 2013, and you can kind of tell that they just kind of didn't remember how heavy this song is. Like, they start playing it, and James is like just getting really into it, and it's a really powerful song. The Unforgiven 2, and I know everyone's going to give me shit for this also, The Unforgiven 2 is my favorite song of all time, and I don't care what anyone says. From the twangy B-bender guitar to the what I think is one of James' best set of lyrics. A lot of people get pissed because they're like, he said Unforgiven 2, that's stupid and that's dumb and I don't like it because he said the name of the song in the song. And that just never bothered me, I can really relate to that song. It hits me right here every time. Better Than You and Slither are good rockers. Carpe Diem maybe is pretty cool too. Bad Seed I'm not a super big fan of, but I don't think it's a bad song. Where the Wild Things Are loses me, like I said. Prince Charming is great. Low Man's Lyric is great. Attitude is probably one of the standout tracks that people don't talk about. And the ending Fixer, which is great. Also, I didn't talk about the Outlaw Torn enough. The Outlaw Torn is fucking awesome from Load. Listen to that fucking song. Fixer is great. It's not quite as good of an album closer as the Outlaw Torn, but it's a great album. And I really suggest people who don't like Load and Reload go back and give them another chance, because they're actually both really, really good albums. Maybe you won't think it's the best album, but I think you'll come to appreciate, if you listen with an open mind, that they're different, but that doesn't make them bad. Alright guys, until next time, take care.